What if the American Revolution failed? Picture the smoke clearing over a quiet field near Saratoga. Redcoats step forward, bayonets gleaming. The battered rebel line wavers and finally breaks. No triumphant drums, no surrender of a British army, no French fleet rushing to help. In this world, the stars and stripes never fly over a new nation. Instead, a Union Jack rises over 13 restless colonies that never quite become the United States, and the consequences ripple far beyond the Atlantic. The map bends. The age of revolutions changes tempo. Even the way humanity thinks about rights, empires, and the future itself takes a different turn. Before we twist the timeline, let's ground ourselves. What really happened? The American Revolution was a messy, improvised gamble. Protests over taxes and representation turned into a shooting war in 1775 at Lexington and Concord. Patriots seized local power, clung on at Bunker Hill, and tried to keep their fragile army alive under George Washington. In 1776, they made a dangerous bet, the Declaration of Independence. Most revolutions die right there. But the American Rebellion survived setback after setback. Howe took New York. Washington retreated. Then came small, sharp strikes. Trenton, Princeton, just enough to keep hope alive. The pivot was 1777 at Saratoga. Burgoyne's campaign to cut New England from the rest stalled and collapsed, leading to a stunning British surrender. That shattered the idea that the crown could easily pacify the colonies. France, smelling opportunity, recognized the American cause and entered the war. Suddenly, this wasn't just a colonial rebellion. It became an international war in which Britain was stretched thin across oceans. Years later, with French ships blocking the Chesapeake and Washington closing in at Yorktown, the British position finally broke. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 confirmed the impossible. A new republic was born. Now, pull one thread. Imagine Saratoga goes the other way. Burgoyne isn't trapped and starving. He links up with British forces moving north. Howe, instead of drifting toward Philadelphia, commits to the plan. The rebel militias that swarm the woods fail to cut supply lines. Patriot morale dips. The American advance fractures. No dramatic British surrender. And crucially, no French gamble. Paris hesitates, runs the numbers, and stays out. What happens next isn't a clean cinematic finale. It's a slow suffocation. Without French money and ships, the Continental Army runs on fumes. The winter bites harder. Loyalist pockets, New York, parts of the Carolinas, expand. A British Peace Commission offers a deal, not to an American nation, but to a set of British colonies. Amnesty, lower taxes, seats in Westminster, a promise to respect colonial assemblies, and a hard line against further westward land grabs. It's the old Imperial bargain, rebranded for a new century. Exhausted farmers look at their empty barns and nod. The rebel coalition begins to unravel. By 1780, the shooting war winds down. Not with a thunderclap, but with a tired, uneasy silence. Dawn in New York. Redcoats parade down Broadway, Loyalists cheer, patriots smolder in the crowd. The flag above the harbor is the same as in 1765, but the colony it hangs over is not. The Crown understands it cannot simply rewind. The colonists have tasted the possibility of self-rule, so Britain improvises, something like a British America Act. The 13 colonies retain their assemblies. They gain representation in Parliament, small at first, then more substantial with time. The King's ministers talk about partners and fellow subjects, not just subordinates. A new imperial language emerges, part flattery, part calculation, and the frontier. This is where the difference bites deepest. The proclamation line of 1763, meant to keep settlers east of the Appalachians and reduce frontier bloodshed, stays in force. In our timeline, the United States dissolved that line and surged west. Here, the British keep it, not forever, but long enough to reshape the map. London recognizes indigenous confederacies, Haudenosaunee in the northeast, powerful alliances in the Ohio Valley, as buffer states under Crown protection. Treaties are still broken, pressure still builds, but fewer freelance wars erupt, and the conquest isn't a fevered sprint. Picture a large, acknowledged indigenous reserve stretching from the Great Lakes to the Ohio, an uneasy protectorate where British diplomats, fur traders, and chiefs gather in smoky longhouses to argue over borders, trade, and law. This doesn't turn the frontier into a utopia. Settlers still push. Company men still hunger for land. But imperial officials, keen to avoid costly guerrilla wars, lean harder on negotiation, centralized deals, and regulated migration. Some American settlers resent the leash and mutter about a second rebellion. London counters with land grants in controlled corridors, peppered with new forts and courts. It's slower, more bureaucratic, and, compared to the wild sprint of the 19th century United States, strangely stable. Now, the deepest fracture of all, slavery. Under the Empire, the slave trade is abolished in 1807, enforced by the Royal Navy along the Atlantic. In our timeline, the United States kept slavery alive in the South until a brutal civil war. Here, the southern colonies, still British, get no such breathing room. London ends the trade, and then, in 1833, abolishes slavery throughout the empire. That includes plantations in Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. Imagine the shock. A century of wealth tied to human bondage is ordered to unravel. The British state pays compensation to slaveholders, as it did in the Caribbean. Freed people form churches, schools, and farming cooperatives under the wary gaze of imperial magistrates. There is violence, riots, plots, and reprisals, but no four-year civil war. The moral cost is still immense, the human journey still hard, but emancipation comes early and by decree. The Cotton Kingdom shrinks, industry shifts. Port cities, Charleston, Savannah, reinvent themselves or stagnate. Some planters lobby for a special status to slow emancipation. London refuses. Troops disembark, steady and silent. New labor patterns emerge. Wage work, share contracts overseen by crown courts. Migration north into growing industrial towns. Black political clubs form, loyal to crown or to reform movements that echo those in London and Manchester. Out of this churn, a new Atlantic abolitionist identity forms. Speeches in Boston that rhyme with sermons in Bristol. Newspapers in Kingston that share editorials with Philadelphia. Freedom spreads not through civil war, but through imperial fiat and constant struggle to make it real. Now look beyond the ocean. Napoleon rises in Europe, and Britain faces its greatest test. But in this world, Britain isn't merely an island power plus scattered colonies. It commands the manpower, timber, iron, and grain of a loyal British America. Colonial regiments trained on the frontier march in Iberia. Shipyards in Halifax and New York churn out oak and sail. The Atlantic becomes a British lake. Trafalgar still shatters French naval dreams. But on land, the empire leans not just on Irish and English soldiers. Now there are battalions from Massachusetts, Virginia, and Pennsylvania wearing red. The war ends with Napoleon still beaten, perhaps sooner, perhaps with a heavier British hand at the peace table. Either way, Britain emerges taller. And the map of North America? Without an independent United States to buy Louisiana, that vast territory remains a prize on the chessboard. France, desperate for cash, may try to sell it to Britain directly, or Britain seizes strategic river ports when war breaks out. New Orleans becomes a British foothold, an imperial crossroads of languages and law. The Mississippi becomes not an American artery, but a border for British administration and indigenous protection zones. Oregon country tilts British by default. Spanish California persists longer, but finds itself shadowed to the north and east by British influence. The western half of the continent becomes a slow mosaic of British districts, indigenous protectorates, and lingering Spanish claims, not the sweeping Star-Spangled March we know. Latin America still erupts. Napoleon's invasion of Spain fractures Spanish authority, and local elites across the Americas push for independence. They don't need Philadelphia to imagine it, but in our world, the United States became a convenient symbol and later a hemispheric guardian under the Monroe Doctrine. Remove that guardian, and British policy becomes decisive. London doesn't trumpet Republican liberty. It champions trade. British bankers and gunboats back governments that open ports, whether monarchist or Republican. Independent Latin states still rise, but many look to London for credit, ships, and protection, not to a non-existent Washington. The hemisphere becomes Britain's economic orbit, less American sphere of influence, more global marketplace tied by insurance policies and naval bases. As the 19th century rolls on, pressure builds inside British America for something more than representation in a faraway parliament. The language of rights from the 1770s never died. It adapted. Reformers argue for responsible government and local control. London has a template, dominion status. Canada receives it. So does, in time, a vast dominion of British America stretching from New England down to the Chesapeake and beyond, federated with provinces inland along the Great Lakes and the Mississippi. Picture a capital, perhaps in Philadelphia or New York, wearing both a British crown and a federal parliament seal. Railways stitch this dominion together earlier and more aggressively because the empire wants a safe, all-British corridor from Atlantic to Pacific. Telegraph lines race along tracks, newspapers cross borders overnight. Immigrants by the millions still come, from Germany, Ireland, Italy, Scandinavia. But their first oath is to the crown. Cities take on familiar shapes with unfamiliar flags. You still have Wall Street, but it answers to City of London capital in a tighter embrace. Boston still builds universities, but their charters speak the language of empire. Law and culture shift subtly. There is no U.S. Constitution, but there are charters, bills, and conventions that approximate it. A written Dominion Constitution emerges, aligned with British common law and a stronger role for courts than in older colonies. Religious life looks familiar. Baptists, Methodists, Catholics flourish, but the established church lingers a little longer in public life before receding. Suffrage expands by waves, tied to Imperial reform acts. The press is rowdy, transatlantic, and ferociously political. And in black communities across British America, Emancipation Day becomes a sacred civic ritual, linking Halifax to Charleston to Kingston. Quick question for you. In a world where the revolution failed, which outcome surprises you most? Earlier emancipation under the crown, or a surviving indigenous buffer state? Share your take in the comments. And if you want more alternate histories told like this, tap subscribe and stay with us for the next What If? Then, the 20th century arrives like a thunderclap. In 1914, when Europe explodes, there is no neutral United States waiting offshore. There is the British Empire and its sprawling dominions, including British America, stepping in on day one. The Western Front still grinds, but British manpower is deeper. North American industry is already integrated, and supply chains are shorter across the Atlantic. Maybe the war ends months earlier. Maybe the toll is still staggering, but the peace looks different. With an enormous Anglo-Atlantic bloc at the table, the post-war order leans heavily British. Wilsonian rhetoric is replaced by imperial pragmatism mixed with reformist impulses. A stronger League of Nations emerges, but it is also more evidently an empire's club, promising stability, provoking resentment. The interwar years look oddly familiar and unfamiliar. The 1929 crash still hits, but financial gravity sits in London, not New York. The shock ripples through Manchester mills and Toronto exchanges as much as Liverpool docks and Philadelphia banks. In response, the imperial market consolidates. Tariffs inside the empire drop. External barriers rise. Factories in Boston and Birmingham retool in sync. The cultural boom still happens. Jazz and modernism in movies, just carried by studios that fly the Union Jack in their credits and distribute across a unified Atlantic audience. When 1939 dawns dark over Europe, British America is already committed. The RAF draws pilots from Montreal and Massachusetts alike. The Royal Navy sails with destroyers built in shipyards from Glasgow to Newark. Japan still hungers in the Pacific. Without a separate United States to shock awake at Pearl Harbor, the war in Asia starts differently. British America is already at war, already mobilized, already building carriers on both coasts. The defense of Singapore and Hong Kong plays out with heavier reinforcement and a string of bruising naval battles stretching from the Indian Ocean to Alaska. There's no miracle immunity. War is still chaos. But the industrial weight that saved Britain in our timeline comes from within the empire here, not across a neutral border. The atomic age might arrive under a different banner. The British Tube Alloys program, fused with Imperial resources and North American laboratories, could deliver a bomb without waiting for a US Manhattan project that never exists. The test site might be Woomera's deserts in Australia or the empty reaches of northern Canada. The first mushroom cloud could billow under a crown and a constellation of Dominion stars. That raises hard questions. Does an empire armed with nuclear fire hold together more tightly? Or does the sheer terror of the weapon force it to become something new? An imperial federation transformed into a commonwealth with a real parliament and shared sovereignty? And what of decolonization? It still comes. The moral pressure after 2 world wars is immense, and movements in India, Africa, and the Middle East still push, strike, and organize. But the timeline bends. A stronger, more integrated core might manage a more coordinated, negotiated exit. Perhaps the empire evolves into an Atlantic-Pacific Commonwealth earlier. Less empire, more union. Anchored by British America, the British Isles, Australia, India as partner rather than possession. That's the optimistic arc. The darker arc is that power resists reform. Cracks widen, strikes in Calcutta, protests in Lagos, boycotts in Cairo force confrontations. The center holds until it doesn't. Either way, our world's Cold War looks different. The superpower contest might pit a vast Anglo-Commonwealth against the Soviet Union, with Europe squeezed between them, and China recalculating its revolutions in the shadow of a different West. Technology and culture sprint along new paths. The Atlantic corridor, London, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, becomes a single research spine. Patents flow through imperial courts, standards unify. The first commercial jets fly across a network of royal airways that feel both familiar and foreign. Television shows mix British humor with North American scale. By the 1960s, a space program crests. Rockets lift from Newfoundland or Woomera, and the capsule hatch opens not to a single nation's flag but to a banner that carries a Union Jack and a constellation of Dominion stars. The broadcast plays on televisions from Leeds to Baltimore, the empire that didn't break planting a footprint on the moon. Do we lose something in this world? Yes. The American experiment, the Constitution stitched by compromise and ambition, the bold rhetoric of a republic, never becomes the lodestar it did. The language of rights still grows, but under the canopy of a reformed empire. It feels less revolutionary, more negotiated. We also gain some things. An earlier end to slavery in the South, at least on paper. A stronger chance of an indigenous buffer state with legal recognition. Fewer frontier wars burning unchecked. But every gain has a shadow. Emancipation without civil rights enshrined in a powerful, written constitution leaves room for prejudice to shift forms. Indigenous protectorates can be starved by policy as easily as they can be recognized by treaty. The weight of empire can feel like order, and like a hand on your shoulder that never quite lets go. All of it traces back to fragile moments, a March order that changes by a day, a general who chooses Philadelphia over Albany, a battle at Saratoga where a hungry regiment holds just long enough, or doesn't. History turns on men chewing hard bread in the cold, on ministers whispering in candlelit rooms, on ships that arrive late. The line between the world we know and the world we just walked through is thinner than we think. So, what if the American Revolution failed? Maybe the crown bends instead of breaks. Maybe the map of the Americas is edged in red, and the age of revolutions hums at a lower pitch. Maybe freedom comes earlier for some, differently for others, and the 20th century speaks with an imperial accent that never quite fades. And maybe that's the point. History isn't inevitable. It's a narrow path through a forest of possibilities. We live in one branch. The others are still there, rustling, reminding us how easily everything could have gone another way.